Welcome again to the Nailsin Ratings. I've started out this idea of looking back at the DCEU movies, and I apologize for not getting back to it as quickly as I intended to, but, things get in the way. Of course, I began with the beginning, which was Man of Steel, and as discussed in there, Man of Steel was originally going to be a Superman franchise, not a DC Universe franchise, but plans behind the scenes changed, and that was the beginning of too many cooks in the kitchen, I believe, that doomed this franchise right out of the gate. And so you had Man of Steel, which had its problems, and people are still upset about them even to this day, and it continued on into the follow-up, where there's an indecisive Superman, and it's all dark and gloomy, which dark and gloomy fits a Batman world, but it doesn't necessarily fit a Superman world, and there's a lot of truth to that. The argument in defense of it was that this is a freshman Superman. He's new to the scene. He doesn't quite know what he's doing. There could have been some other elements that might have helped that along to make that story stronger, but it wasn't there. But set him up for what it was, this freshman Superman, and kind of gave you this real world look, which was the idea coming out of the Nolan films, that, hey, can you do a Superman Begins, which is what it was. And so you see the consequences of superpowers on the real world. That was kind of the take on that one. So, again, it would have been just part one, probably, of a trilogy of Superman films, and that would have been that. But we need a DCU universe to compete with what Marvel did while we were sleeping. And that's pretty much what it was. Marvel had proven there was a vast market and audience hungry for this concept. And so DC jumped in, and they rushed in way too fast, trying to catch up when they should have just accepted, well, we're late, but let's try to do it the right way. Well, they didn't. They came in and manipulated a movie that's already set to be something else and tried to turn it into another thing. And then here, their response was its sequel, which really wasn't a sequel to it. It was some other movie to introduce the idea that there's this DC universe of all the DC characters that Superman lives with. And the problem right off the bat with this is that the movie, of course, Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, a really bad title, was to introduce this universe, and it was trying to do what it took Marvel, 4 to 5 years to do, and they tried to do it in one movie. It's an impossible task. I don't care who was going to direct it or write it or what have you. It was an impossible goal to achieve. But nevertheless, this is what they were given. This is the parameters. And so instead of Man of Steel 2, or Man of Tomorrow, as I would have liked it to have been, but anyway, was this, so it was instead of Man of Steel 2, it's Batman versus Superman. So here we go. So right off the bat, the idea is Batman has had a 20-year career, and he's a much older man, and now Superman is introduced to the world, and it's a world of superpowers and far more fantastic adventures rather than Batman's sort of pulp-style action adventures that he must have had in the past 2 decades fighting crime in Gotham City. I was not keen on that. I always liked the idea that Superman is the first superhero, because he is. Yeah, I know the Phantom and the comic strips and the other pulp characters and all that, but it's fully solidified and first introduced through Superman in Action Comics, and the one genre that comic books can completely own and call their own is the superhero. All the other genres were derivative of other media, and so but this is where they found themselves, and it makes sense in the context of what they're left with. And you got to force this world. You can't go off and do a new Batman movie and introduce your new Batman the way Marvel did it if they're trying to catch up in one movie instead of several. So we had to just say, well, there was a Batman, and let's explain it. And they do. For what it is, they do. Here comes Bruce Wayne. He comes to Metropolis, and there's the devastation of Superman versus Zod, and you see all that. And Bruce Wayne, turns out, is a bit victimized by this because his building in Metropolis, property of his company and whatnot, and the guy overseeing it for him dies, and then his employees, and there's a little girl there, her parents die in it, and he witnesses all this, and he just the searing hatred that he has for Superman flying in the sky fighting Zod, and he just blames it all on them, the others, the Kryptonians, and Superman's a Kryptonian, so they're all bad, and they had their spat and treated us like insects, and look what happened. And so that's the starting point of the origin of Batman's rage at Superman. And for all intents and purposes, that works. You see him in it. It's pretty well explained out. And that's it. And it's an interesting matter in that it literally says mankind is introduced to the Superman. And so this is the dawn of this new age. And Batman was just some local strange urban myth character type thing for Gotham City, and that was it. This is the beginning of the Batman that most people know from the comic books, who is quite the international and sometimes outer space superhero, hanging out with Justice League and all of that. So it's kind of an interesting thing where it's kind of this jumping off point from the Batman films we've seen before, and that includes the ones in the 90s and all that. It's all very localized to Gotham City. There was none of the more fantastic adventures beyond that, where he's the Caped Crusader and crime fighter in Gotham and that sort of thing. So the 90s films and the Nolan films, they all kept it at that. And then here we see a new Batman and a new version of him, and he's in this world of the DC Comics world where there's superpowers and whatnot. So it was good for what it was, and necessary for introducing him this way, given the parameters they were forced into again by the Warner Brothers cooks in that kitchen. So, Batman's enraged. Well, that's new. But he's so enraged to the point that he's blinded to certain truths. That Superman is not to blame for what Zod and his crew did. In fact, he saved the world from what they were trying to do. But Batman is holding him responsible and has decided he's too much of a danger to be allowed on the Earth. A lot of it goes into, there's clues in the movie to explain the psychology of Batman, and then there's the basic that they hit on the origin story, and of course that's very important that you understand the name of his mother. Get into that later, but it sets up where he is, and he's blinded by that, and you also get hints and clues over his past life and career as Batman, where most notably Robin is dead. His suit is on display in the Batcave, and you see clearly, it appears, the Joker had murdered Robin at some point. And we now know, thanks to Zack Snyder, that was not Jason Todd. No, it was Dick Grayson, the original, the real Robin, was apparently dead in this universe, which is odd because I remember them saying they had plans for a Nightwing movie. So, I don't know. But since it's not Zack's show anymore, maybe they'll just forget about that. But anyway, so it's setting up where Batman is. He's a harsher Batman, and there was a lot of this that people were upset about how brutal he was, even to the point that some of these henchmen and thugs get killed and fighting with him. But again, you're still in this real world, and I don't know how you could maintain credibility and work it out that he's able to just knock them all out or something like that. I mean, like the Adam West has had bat gas all the time, and that would do it. Once you've made the choice that that's the universe you're in, you have to stick to it for the integrity of the story and its narrative. And plus, if you're saying that this is immoral, then you're saying all police officers are immoral, because depending on the scenario they're in, when they're threatened, they defend themselves. And how do they do that? They do it with guns. So to hold Batman to some impossible standard, because you're already mad at the movie for other reasons, and a lot of those reasons I would agree with, this one, I'm not on page with you there. And so it also backs up to where Batman's psychology is, and that's vital for this thing to work. Now, keep in mind, the theatrical version is pretty much indefensible. The complete cut, that's a different matter. You get more of the story. One of the biggest problems with it, in my mind, is not Batman, but Lex Luthor. This Lex Luthor they introduced, I understood where they were going with it, the idea that he's the opposite of Superman. Well, not just that he's virtuous and everything, but that he's tall, he's good looking, he's built, and all this stuff. Lex Luthor here is this frail, skinny little nerd guy. And so so physically he's the complete opposite of Superman. But that's all fine. But when they get to the idea that not only has Batman got some issues, Lex Luthor has serious issues, to the point that he's basically doing his Heath Ledger impression. And Lex Luthor is not psychotic like the Joker. So it's almost as if a lot of people are bereft of ideas of how to present their villains. They have to be these psychotic nuts. And that's just a bit lazy. And so that was a big downer for me in Batman versus Superman. But it could have worked better had they applied that, but I'm not sure whose decision that was. Is it more the actor's choice, or was it the story they wanted? I don't know, but I don't think that was a good choice. Superman himself is still indecisive and mopey. The world is still divided about him, and it gets to him. He's still trying to figure out what his place is and what he's supposed to do. That's a weak part of the movie as well. He should have been a little further along. It's there for the plot device that he's a bit baffled and befuddled and gets easily fooled by this plot by Luthor, and to eventually manipulate Batman into killing him. But he should have thought this through a little better. Understandably, had it been an actual sequel to Man of Steel, we would have seen probably a better Superman who's learned some lessons from the previous movie and is a bit more sure of himself. But that's not what we got. Going forward, eventually the whole thing's a plot by Luthor. Luthor's motives, you could argue, there's some legitimacy to them in the fact that Superman's presence changes the natural outcome of mankind, and you should be concerned about that. And plus, they don't know for sure that the Kryptonians are done. They don't know that they can trust, or even if Superman has told them that there's no Krypton anymore, they don't know that that's true, and they don't know that there's more Kryptonians coming, and they can't be certain. No, they're all gone and stuck in the Phantom Zone. They don't really know that, and they're concerned about other possible alien invasions and whatnot, and they need to be able to defend that. And of course, he just wants to kill Superman. They never really get to that point. He talks about the threat and that we need a weapon, and all that makes sense. It doesn't quite make sense why the government would block him on that. They wouldn't, so they're failing. But they should have stressed it more, that it's about the alien influence on the development of mankind, and that even just by being there, Superman is already poisoning the development and the natural evolution of humans. And that would be a better motive, I think, for Luthor to justify his actions and what he's trying to do. And the idea of getting rid of Superman, even though Superman, for the most part, isn't really that much of a threat, because he just chooses not to be. So in a lot of ways, it would have worked better, and you could already even argue that Bruce Wayne would probably even agree with that at some point. there are some strange sequences where Clark's indecisive and he wanders off and he's climbing a snowy mountain and he runs into the ghost of his father and all that. And I said, well, was he just dreaming this and he never really left Metropolis? I don't know. And then suddenly he appears again to save Lois Lane. And some of that, I probably should have rethought that for those sequences. But nevertheless, the point of, Martha is kidnapped, and that sets off the whole thing, and Superman's got to go fight Batman because Lex Luthor told him to, or he'll kill his mother. And so they fight. Well, there's plenty of opportunities there for the fight never to have taken place. First of all, Superman shows up and he could have just surrendered. Just says, I'm not fighting you. And what would Batman do? None of his little traps would go off or anything. But what? You're supposed to fight me. But still, they needed the fight. And at first, Superman's trying to explain it to him. And of course, the traps go off, and the sonic blast, and the machine guns, and everything. And you just have to accept that, Superman's pissed off, and so he fights him. No, I think that's a weak part there. So they have their fight, of course, and then the big scene, Martha. Superman tells him, you're letting Martha die. And I accept this scene. Everybody makes fun of it, and a lot of the jokes, look, they're funny. You know how they do how the movie should have ended, and they did that with Justice League. It wasn't funny at all, except for that one joke they did about Martha, in which Steppenwolf says his mother's name is Martha. Batman freaks out. Switches sides. It's pretty funny. But the movie gave you the psychology of the man and the state of mind he's in, and the anger and what all he's seeing, which left him vulnerable and open to manipulation by Lex Luthor and put him in that position. Was it handled well? No, because as I went through, there's problems here and there and all that. But overall, is that really the giant stinker of the movie? No, it's just not. And so this is like a card Superman plays. And at that moment, Batman sees what he's doing, and he sees the humanity of Superman, and he understands what's happened here. Superman, of course, goes off to fight the Doomsday that Luthor has created. Originally, it was supposed to be Metallo, and that might have worked a little better, especially if they'd set it up in Man of Steel as like one of the like that general who ends up sacrificing himself. He had actually been Metallo, and had a relationship with Lois Lane and all that kind of stuff. Might have been cool, but it didn't work out that way. And so they had Doomsday out of Luthor's blood and Zod's corpse. Okay, whatever. And so it sets out the big fight so that you can have Dark Knight Returns and the death of Superman combined in this story. And then, lo and behold, Wonder Woman's there. So they introduced Wonder Woman. Of course, the movie, again, is trying to lay the groundwork for the DCEU. Again, trying to do what Marvel did in 5 years in one movie. I can't do it. But she looked good. She performed her part well. And we all knew we had a new star here. And that showed up in her own movie, which was fantastic. But it is a bit of a shoehorn. But it's again, this is like, you're going to have to see this in other movies to explain where all these other super people are coming from. And so, and that Luthor had all this information and blah, 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 blah. So they get there, there's the big fight, and the only way to stop him is kryptonite. And there's Batman's kryptonite spear, and Superman's got to go get it, and he's got to be the one to do it. Well, no, he didn't have to be the one. There's Wonder Woman. Kryptonite doesn't hurt her. Give her the spear. And maybe you can take him from behind and, hold him steady while she's driving it into something like that, And he would not have needed to die. So that's quite a tremendous hole there. The only way to fix it would be that Doomsday got the best of Wonder Woman and just laid waste to her and knocked her out of the fight. And then Superman's left. He's alone. He's the only one who can do it. And that's probably how they should have done that. So, yeah, quite a bit of a problem there. So Doomsday dies, Superman dies, and everybody's sad. And suddenly the world realizes, gee, he wasn't such a bad guy after all. I feel kind of sorry now that he's gone. And they have a big funeral and all of that. And then Batman gives his hints that they need to build the Justice League because he's got a bad feeling. Because, yes, another thing that was shoehorned in was a dream that Batman had about Darkseid having taken over the Earth. There's parademons everywhere, and Superman, apparently corrupted by the anti-life equation, was one of Darkseid's servants, and he kills a bunch of people, and apparently kills Batman too while he's interrogating him, and all that stuff, and then he wakes up, and then there's the Flash, and then suddenly that's a dream too, apparently, some way, somehow, I don't know, but the Flash showed up from the future, trying to tell him what to do, and then disappears. It would have been cool if the story could have continued where they kind of gave some explanation as to how this happened. Why did Batman have a dream? You know, who was manipulating it? Was it the new gods doing it to making him see it? We'll never get any of that because I'm pretty sure no one's going to bother with it. But, again, there's a lot of stuff shoehorned to make up for catching up with Marvel. And so that's one of the biggest drags on the movie. It can't be its own entity for what it's trying to do. But overall, with that story and the manipulation of Luthor and his plot is more clear in the extended cut, and it works better. And for me, for being a fan of these comic book stories and whatnot, there was plenty of there for me to enjoy. There wasn't enough of Superman there to show him as Superman. There's a few brief montage scenes of him performing these, magnificent feats and stuff, and there's even him dragging a giant ship across the ice, which is right out of the comics and some of the things he would do, and of course saving the rocket, and then he goes and saves a little girl and all that. But I kind of wish there had been maybe a little more of that. To give him more, but basically Batman steals the show, which he was kind of intended to. They got nervous about the critical reaction to Man of Steel, even though it made its money. It wasn't the smash hit they wanted. It was successful, but not a smash hit. And so they figured they needed Batman to come in and save the day. Well, he didn't. But there was some great scenes of Batman, and the scenes of Batman rescuing Martha from the henchmen is, oh my God, hands down, the absolute best Batman scenes out of all the movies. I mean, it was just really great. Can't get enough of it. And so you get things like that. Of course, Wonder Woman was great and all that, despite, it's, like I said, much of a shoehorn based on necessity of the parameters that were set up by the studio. But there you go. There was the problems with Batman versus Superman. And it left a bad taste in people's mouths. They were let down, they felt, by it, that it just wasn't, it was a big of a, and of course the theatrical cut, it is bad. It just is. I mean, there's so much left out to where it's hard to kind of, it's left up to you to just kind of pretend and finish the script for them. That's a terrible idea. The extended cut's the one you need to see. So it did its damage, and they didn't realize it. They were so hyped up on it because the massive hype for this movie, the excitement for it, which is why it made its money. There was that draw, and then people saw it, and then it begins to diminish. Now, you will see this happen again and again with quite a few other franchises as well. But there was a brand power there for a bit, and then they messed it up. But they were already, Zach, quick, do the Justice League, and there was going to be a Justice League Part 1 and Part 2, and it was going to be done back to back, and all this sort of thing, and then the responses started to come in, and whoa, put the brakes on that. So, again, boy, were there a lot of cooks in the kitchen, but there's just going to increase. They don't learn the lesson from that. And we'll get to more of that when we get to Justice League. But before we get to Justice League, up next will be Suicide Squad. Yeah. if you thought Batman versus Superman had problems, but there you go, Batman versus Superman. I do recommend the extended cut. It failed to do what it was supposed to do because no one movie could do that. You can't do what Marvel did in 5 years in one movie. You just really can't do that. And they should have treated this universe as it was and had their characters develop in other movies. If they had a movie with 2 or 3 others that they meet and that sort of thing, in a more coherent story that was had more credibility to it, it might have worked to a certain extent. But just like this all at once and just borrowing cool scenes from Dark Knight Returns and stuff like that, maybe they should have just done Dark Knight Returns and said, yes, this is the distant future. The rest of the movies will detail the DC universe and what happened and how did they reach this point. But no. So there it is. That's my overview and looking back at Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice. Thank you for suffering through this. I do appreciate it. Please subscribe, and if you did like it, please like it. Check the link description below for the links to my mini stores that have lovely goodies just for you. Yes. Again, thank you for watching and listening.